This man, this master, was unstoppable. He would have gone on, he would have performed his mission, come what may, even though some aspects of it didn't suit him. He had this idea that if you could do one thing, you could do another, and he didn't doubt it. If you can apply yourself in a certain ability, then you can apply yourself to another ability. And he did it all the time. In this life, the big thing is looking at life and saying, what can I do that will do the maximum good for the world? It's about fulfilling, you could say your duty, but I would say your calling. How can I play my part in the world change? Whatever that is, wherever it fits. And this is where Dr. King is so fantastic, because he liberates people completely to say, yes, you can do that. He really believed in people. He believed in their potential. He said to me one day, there is nothing I've done that you couldn't do. And I looked at him, we were standing by the Thames, and I sort of nodded. I just didn't believe it, I'll be honest. And he said,
hello and welcome back to the Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence. My name is Darren Bull, and this is the podcast helping you to awaken your chakras, to unlock your psychic powers, and to discover true spirituality. In today's show, we look at the life of Master of Yoga, Dr. George King, a man who embraced his destiny and reoriented his whole life towards maximum service to others. What can you do to become a greater force for good and embrace your true spiritual calling? Keep watching.
Richard.
Darren.
So let me set the scene here a little bit for our focus
Please
today.
do.
So it's London, 1954, and a man sits alone in deep meditation, in complete, unperturbed stillness. For a decade, he has trained himself in the highest forms of yoga, preparing for a mission which lay just beyond the awareness of his conscious mind. His heart is set on a life of silent service, unseen, unknown, working quietly behind the scenes. A master strategist, if you will, manipulating subtle energies to inspire the consciousness of humanity toward the light, as many great masters had worked for thousands of years before. But destiny had other plans, and the fate of humanity hangs in the balance. One Saturday morning, a voice from outside of himself pierces through the ordinary hustle and bustle of the street below, striking his eardrums with a gentle firmness. Prepare yourself. You are to become the voice of interplanetary parliament. A call to action as unusual as it was mysterious, and in the days, weeks, and months that follows, he soon realizes his would be a very public mission, a mission with endless demands, speaking tours, interviews, the responsibility of leadership. And while it's not the silent role he imagined, he accepts the responsibility of his mission, but not just for the greater good, but for the greatest good. Because that man knew that the path of light is not the path of ease, but one of sacrifice, one of action, and fearless service to divine will. A man whose courage in the face of public ridicule and misunderstanding and opposition would change the course of history for an entire planet. And that man, of course, is Dr. George King.
Very good.
And in this week's episode, we follow his story. You know, the story of a master who didn't want the limelight, as we talked before, who didn't want fame or adulation, or the complexity of running a worldwide organization, but who embraced his calling with his own trademark, unconditional surrender to God.
It's very true. Yeah, in fact, he summarizes it very well, actually. I've got a little passage here taken from the biography, The King Who Came to Earth, which Brian Kniep and I authored. He said this in 1961, actually, some years later. At one time, my dearest wish was to have a class of crack students who could work together to give various information to mankind, but not to be attached to mankind, to be detached from mankind, but have channels through which various informations could be given to mankind, such as books and so on, but without becoming attached in any way. In other words, to go into some retreat in some way and become self-supporting. That was my dearest wish. But I had to face this fact to myself, or in myself, that it couldn't be done, that the way of the monk is not the way. The way of the yogi who retreats is not the way. The way of the fakir who stands gazing at the sun is not the way. You have to be all three. You have to be monk, fakir, and yogi, and yet work in among mankind. And this is the most difficult thing to do, but this is the way in these days.
Oh, what an inspiring passage that is. Yeah, really
it's
good.
Very revealing about him.
Totally.
Knowing him as I do, and talking to him about this very matter, because I did have the role, even in his lifetime, of doing the bulk of the public media appearances. He'd done them, don't get me wrong. He did an American tour, and he did TV, did radio, but it wasn't his thing. And he had another more important mission to perform, much more important mission to perform. So I was doing a lot of that, and we did discuss it. And I know for a fact he did not like the public platform. He handled it very well. I mean, he was very confident. There's a strange thing, because here you have a shy person.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting because he talks in more than one of his lectures about a visualization that somebody did. He doesn't say
Oh,
who.
yeah.
They were either a young man or even a boy, I'm not sure which, but certainly a young man.
Yeah.
And so this, I think, was him, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
who was shy and therefore visualized himself in a robe. And he did this over and over and over again, speaking, because he knew he would have to speak in the future. And this makes it all the more poignant, actually. I'm going to refer to the biography again, if I may, when we see his first ever real public appearance. He had a healing circle based in Maida Vale at the time, of a few people. It had grown a bit following the command of 1954, following his contact with the master Aetherius and so forth. He was receiving transmissions, but he hadn't gone public. And then he went public. And this is what he says about it. This was January the 29th, 1955. He said, I had to start for some reason best known to the great ones at the bottom. I was informed that the trance condition must be done in front of the people of London. When the whole of my group, just on the verge of this first transmission going before the public, walked out and left me absolutely and completely alone, it was like adding insult to injury. But you see, this was another essential experience. I will never forget my feelings that night when I walked into Caxton Hall, London, a lone little figure. I looked at the audience, went up onto the platform and thought to myself, how in the name of the Lord can I get this very, very difficult trance condition under these conditions? And he goes on. And it's very poignant, especially when you know him and you know that he didn't like it at the best of times. He was told to do it.
Gosh,
and he went public, and everybody left him. These were people who'd been coming, week in, week out to his transmissions, but they obviously were either embarrassed in front of the public or whatever it was. They didn't stand by him, and it goes to show. I mean, I've been through a lot with Dr. King at his side anyway, trying to help, and seeing various crises come along that he had to deal with. I have no doubt at all, and I had no doubt when I was there with him, that whatever had happened, if it had come to it, he would have carried on completely on his own. It didn't come to that at all, or it didn't get near to that. But had it done, this man, this master, was unstoppable. He was indefatigable. He would have gone on, he would have performed his mission, come what may, even though some aspects of it didn't suit him. Some did, actually. I mean, he was a scientific person. He was a scientist, a meta-scientist, you could say. He was a strategist. He was definitely a warrior. And some of the actions that he was engaged in and the missions that he invented and so on absolutely suited him very well. And they were performed usually with a small number of people around him. Perhaps not people who always lived up to his expectations, because he had tremendous faith in people. But however, he did that. But that side of it, no, that was not his cup of tea. And I often felt that was one of the reasons I was around, because I did a lot of that in his lifetime.
Yeah, it's I love the extracts that you shared there, because they just kind of go to show that even in our own way in our life, when we look at something and feel that we're not kind of suitable for that, if it's in the highest good, it's really, we really shouldn't hesitate to embrace that. And those extracts that you read completely, I think, demonstrate that within himself.
And I think it could apply to all kinds of other things too. Like, for example, there are some people. I mean, I only mention myself as an example of this. I was very much into music, into drama, into all things arty. When I first met him, but I realized quickly that wasn't his main focus at all. It wasn't his main interest at all. And what was required was a more scientific, technical, even at times legal ability, a sort of precision, an exactitude in writing, for example, not just flowery phrases or even poetic phrases that are slightly ambiguous. When you're giving teachings, you've got to mean what you say and say what you mean. And so, I think now, if I had the chance, if I was told you've got to be a student again, I wouldn't choose an RT subject now.
In the light of knowing,
yeah, just having been around him, I
see.
just think it'd be more useful and so on.
Mm.
So that's a mild thing. But these are changes that, that the path will direct us to. I think the good news, the great example here that he gives us is, and he was very much of this line of thinking. He had this idea that if you could do one thing, you could do another, and he didn't doubt it. Swami Vivekananda said, if you can't cook, you can't meditate. And it's true of everything. If you can apply yourself in a certain ability, then you can apply yourself the same thing to another ability. And he did it all the time. He was multi-capable.
Yeah.
Even before the society was formed, he had numerous abilities of varying kinds. And we can all do that.
Yeah.
And the good news is we can apply it. We don't get stuck in a rut. I find this fascinating myself because I always look at some of the great composers, because this was my interest, my main interest growing up.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm quite sure, quite understandably, some of those are still working in music. Possibly on another realm, probably on another realm at the moment. I mean, not saying they all are, but probably. And I have to think, well, and that might be required, but one can become attached to a type of behavior. One can become attached to a type of skill, a type of ability that one resonates to. And that in itself can be a limitation. And this is something else he proved.
Yeah.
Yes, do that if it's required. But in this life, the big thing is looking at life and saying, what can I do that will do the maximum good for the world?
Totally.
Not what can I do that is of particular interest to me. And you'll notice a lot of people, for example, who start charities, they'll start a charity which kind of relates to something that's happened to them or to one of their loved ones. Might be a certain type of medical charity.
Sure.
I can understand that. I had a medical condition and I give a certain amount of money to help that medical condition a little bit. Now you do that. But it's not about that, though. It's about what can I do that I believe will bring the greatest good to the world as a whole. Whatever that is, apply oneself to it. And you can do it, because then your motive is right and the ability will come. The ability will follow the motivation if it's right.
That's interesting. That's very encouraging, because I think, I love what you said about Vivekananda and how Dr. King said, if you can do one thing, you can do another, because you can kind of feel, well, I've spent my life doing this thing and becoming good at this thing, but now, but okay, well, if you have done that, you can also do this. And there's, there's, it doesn't, and that sort of allows even the idea of versatility to kind of come forth within you, because you can apply yourself in another way that may, as you say, be more useful, what is required in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, because let's take a creative field, but an artistic, if you like, or creative field. At its best, it's inspirational. It might be a sensitization of tuning in to the environment. Now, that ability could be reapplied. You can gain inspiration in a different kind of an area, which might turn out to be much more satisfying to you than the artistic area, if it's the right one for you in this particular life. You could become psychic, for example. I'm sure there's numerous other things, though, that somebody has a great ability at, say maybe car mechanics. They could apply to radionics. They could even apply it to the structure of writing if they decided to go in that direction. If you can project as a singer, you might be able to project as a speaker, etc. The things can be translated, providing, as I come back to, your motivation is the right one.
Well, I think that, I just want to bring out another aspect that, story that you've shared with me before about, what your focus was actually before you had come across the society and how that changed. You were talking about your how you had got started in music and drama, and the motivation you had there to change the world through that media. I mean, do you want to tell a little bit more about that how you kind of reoriented yourself?
I did. Well, that's what I wanted to do. But then, I found the Ethereal Society, which was so much greater.
Yeah.
But what is interesting, I will say, when I first found what I absolutely resonated with as truth in this particular life was the aphorisms of Patanjali.
Yeah.
When I was on the search, I'd moved on then from the music drama. I was looking for truth. I found that. And the next day, I met a man called John Holder, that people know of, I think. And he told me about the Aetherius Society, and in a talk actually, and then I later met him. But I knew that this is kind of interesting. I knew that this was more important. I recognized it as true. That was that was easy to do. It all made sense. It doesn't make sense to everyone, but it made perfect sense to me. And I was almost disappointed because I had to give up this thing. I just found, that I thought I'm going to gain samadhi through this. And then I could see that world service is much more important. And it is much more important if it's a choice. And it is the way. And what I found out eventually, and I don't regret it for one moment, and that the essence of what was in the Patanjali came out through this path of world service, leading to samadhi. In fact, even further, which I don't think I would have gained through that particular path.
That's particularly interesting, isn't it? It just highlights the power of devoting yourself to a life of not just service, but the highest service that you can find.
We're talking here about the ability to change, which you don't find so much in some of the old teachings, which are more focused on fulfilling your dharma that you're born with, and so on. You might come along with a dharma that you're born with, and the world might change in between you being born and growing up and reaching adulthood. And you might have to then change your dharma in the light of the world changing to something else. Now, the elements of it will still come because the karmic lessons you need must come. But your focus isn't, how can I fulfill my dharma? Or how can I fulfill my, what they say in these pop contest shows, fulfilling my dream. It's not about that. It's about fulfilling, you could say your duty, but I would say your calling. It's how can I change the world? How can I play my part in the world change? Whatever that is, wherever it fits. And this is where Dr. King is so fantastic, because he liberates people completely to say, yes, you can do that. And there's nothing to stop you at all. If you have obligations in life, you've got to honor them, of course.
Sure, yeah.
But other than that, you can go for it and you can achieve it.
I want to just go back to one of the points you were making earlier about, an experience that you may not have had if you hadn't followed this path of service, because I think there's another interesting area to explore is sort of the relationship between this path of world service and advancement, spiritual advancement, and the experiences that we have as a result.
Yes, indeed.
Because, some people might say you're giving up one to do the other, but in reality, it sounds like
I think I went
different.
further than I would have done when I had the cosmic, my entry-level cosmic consciousness. I don't think I would necessarily have had in this life. I don't know that. I think I would have had the samadhic experience, possibly earlier even, but it would have... you can have an experience, but have you raised all the energies in their entirety? No. So most people anyway. But in the second experience, I do believe some kind of assistance was given to me to have that experience. And I think not for my sake, I think just to show that this path leads to this, as promised in the Nine Freedoms, as promised in From Free Will to Freedom by the Master Aetherius. It can lead to this, and this had to be shown, and I was helped.
And what would you say also about just the nature of how you spent your time and what you did, and how that led to these experiences? And
I'd say that the prime thing is service, because some people have said to me, look, I wish I'd done more practices, and practices are absolutely essential, no doubt, but I don't attribute it mainly to practices. I attribute it mainly to service. And I was very privileged. I was put in a position where I was able to do, and still do, great acts of service. And that's when you're always raising the energies. You're not setting out to do that. But if it's selfless, you must be removing the blockages. And the more advanced the service you are permitted to give, obviously, the more elevated will be the outcome. And it must be there. And so, yes, the practices are absolutely crucial, because there has to come a point where you activate Kundalini and you know that you've activated it.
I love that, because, it can be easy to fall into the trap of thinking all these spiritual things are just philosophical, but no, they're
very practical.
Yeah.
They're very real.
Yeah. I think we have a great example in Dr. King here of someone who As one of the things that really struck me in what you said was that he would have gone on in spite of everything else, that he was absolutely unstoppable.
I had no doubt of that. And I saw him at moments of real crisis and without going into them all, where he had sort of internal problems to deal with and might surprise people what he did have to deal with. And he was, he knew what he had to do. And he wanted to take people with him. He was very compassionate, extremely forgiving, by the way, very forgiving. And I think some people, including possibly myself, fell into the trap of thinking, well, Dr. King's forgiven me, so it's okay. That's because he was compassionate. It's still not okay. You've still got to do something about it and put it right.
Yes,
and you can put everything right.
Yeah.
You can put everything right. And he really believed that. He really believed in people. He believed in their potential. He said to me one day, there is nothing I've done that you couldn't do. And I looked at him. We were standing by the Thames and Putney Towpath, and I sort of nodded. I just didn't believe it. I'll be honest. I thought, that's very kind of you to say, but type of thing. And he said, and I really believe it. Came straight back at me. I just thought a thought, and he came straight back at me.
Yeah.
And this shows his incredible compassion and his tremendous faith in human potential to change. He said, I don't know, why don't you go back to God? I don't know what you're waiting for. Why are you taking so long?
It just makes me,
He just couldn't see it, what people were messing about and, having all these experiences they didn't need, they thought they wanted.
Yeah.
And he used to say, there's a big world out there. There's nothing in it. You can go out there and find it. But, it's all on the spiritual path, one way or another. And that path now is a path of predominantly service. You need both. You absolutely need both. You need the inner aspects to inspire you and guide you to serve correctly. And the one thing, even about the highest states, and people say, well, what's that? Don't you just want to get back and just stay in that state? Actually, what you want to do is serve. You were doing it before, but you want it more and you can see it more.
Yes. Yeah,
and you can see why. And that's what it does to you.
And I think that totally relates because, as you perform more service at whatever level you're doing it, whatever step you're taking, whatever you're giving up in your life, however you're redirecting your energy or reapplying or learning new skills, you start to open up this greater and greater world of service that's possible to you, and change yourself.
And it's the only thing that makes sense. Service. Nothing else really makes sense properly, because if you're enlightened, you know oneness. If you know oneness, you know you're part of all life. If you're part of all life, then the only thing to do is to serve all life.
Yeah.
And not go off and just try and help yourself, because you don't actually exist separately from all life.
Totally.
It's a complete nonsense. And so service is the only logical way to behave.
Thank you, Richard.
Hey, Spiritual Freedom Show family, thanks for tuning in and for watching that episode. What I take away from this episode is that the real spiritual advancement comes from doing the maximum good that you can for the world as a whole. And sometimes that means learning new skills or even applying your existing skills in new ways, even if that pushes you outside of your comfort zone. And if you do that with the right motive, then the ability will come. This is about answering our calling and fulfilling our destiny, even if that's not what we were expecting, as in the case of Dr. George King. And he had 100% faith that we could do that. Now, if you enjoyed that episode about Dr. George King and stepping up to fulfill your destiny, we have new shows coming out every fortnight, so thanks for subscribing and supporting the channel. Now, if you're interested in more right now, I invite you to check out this video over here about the Yogi Milarepa, Saint Paul, and the universal path of liberation, or this video over here that goes deeper into how to awaken your intuition for greater peace, clarity, and purpose in your life. Thanks for tuning into the show, and see you next time.